Wives, be submissive to your own husbands.
Say what?
So that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may still be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. And let not your adornment be external only, as in the braiding of hair and wearing of gold jewelry or putting on of dresses. But instead let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of the Lord. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their husbands. Therefore Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you have become her children, if you do what is right without being frightened by fear. Now you husbands likewise, live with your wives in understanding, as with a weaker vessel, since she is a woman. And grant her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. To sum it up, let everyone be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble of spirit. Do not return evil for evil or insult for insult, but instead grant a blessing. For you were called for the very purpose that you might inherit a blessing. For it is written, let him who means to love life and see good days refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking guile. Let him turn away from evil and do good, and let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are always upon the righteous, and his ears attend to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. And who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for that which is good? But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are still blessed. And do not fear intimidation, and do not be troubled, but sanctified Christ as the Lord in your heart, always being ready to give a defense to everyone who asks of you, or to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. And keep good conscience, so that in the thing in which you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ will be put to shame. For it is better if God should will it so, that you suffer for doing what is right, rather than for doing what is wrong. For Christ also died for sins once and for all, the just for the unjust, in order that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in his spirit. In which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who were once disobedient, when the patience of God was waiting in the days of Noah, during the construction of the ark, in which few, that is, only 8, were brought safely through the water. And corresponding to that, baptism now saves you, not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God to restore a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who is at the right hand of God, having gone to heaven after the angels, authorities, and powers had all been subjected to him. Dun, dun, dun. What does that mean, folks? What does that mean? If you were to characterize this in a few words,
Sympathetic, harmonious.
Well,
Brotherly, kind-hearted.
are you just rambling, or do you have an answer? How would you characterize this chapter? A couple of different ways, in a couple of different words. How would you do it? Boy, this board's done arranged like it used to, huh?
Yeah.
Oh well.
Maybe it's not spray.
I don't have any spray.
Oh, Well, I said,
Evelyn might know where it is. I don't know. When she and Shirley leaves, the whole place stops. I can't function without them. Shirley can never die. There's two things. If Shirley dies or if I lose my Bible, I'm going to have to retire and get out of the ministry because I can no longer function without the Bible or without the Shirley. Okay, how would you do it? How would you characterize this chapter if you're going to do it? Tim, what'd you do this weekend?
What did I do?
Yeah.
I don't know. Still doing it.
Did you do anything around the house?
Yeah.
Mow the yard, trim the bushes, take out trash, unclog the sink, get all the cucaracha hair out of it. I did that for Carol, got all the Carol Racha hair out of it.
I did Yard of the Month yesterday.
Yard of the month. Ooh.
And then I went to a jewelry show, and then I watched the Kentucky Derby.
Well, the reason I'm using the fixing up the house example is why would you do all that on your weekend? You know, generally you got the weekend off. What do you want to do? Lay on the couch and lump, right? That's what I like to do. Lay on the couch and lump, scratch myself occasionally, but other than that, not a whole lot of effort or energy expended. But then see, the yard has to be mowed and the bushes have to be trimmed and the sink needs to be fixed and the refrigerator needs to, you know, be kicked so it starts running again. Or else what?
Chaos.
Well, the house will deteriorate. That's not rocket science, folks. You always know when somebody's gone for a long time because weeds grew up in their yards and their papers are piling up and it just looks kind of shabby. Or somebody moves out and without notice and then nobody's in the house for a long time. And you drive through a neighborhood, you can tell right away that that house is empty, right? Why? Well, it's obvious because it's unkept. Well, if that's true in the physical sense, wouldn't it also be true in a spiritual sense? It would. Throughout the scriptures, God often references the Christian being or the collection of Christian beings as a building, as a house, as a temple of worship. And that temple must be maintained, and we're told that at all the time. Each one of us is a different brick in the building. And we are built upon a foundation of God, of Jesus Christ. And if we are to keep that temple as bright and as beautiful as it is, then we've got to maintain this stuff. These bricks will grow old. They'll get moldy. They need new paint. They need new anything. But we've got to maintain the structure of this. If we believe in the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and this is our foundation, then we, the people, become the temple itself. And the Lord encourages us to be a holy and reverent priesthood. Always proud, always ready. And he even mentions it here. You have got to maintain a presence or a power in your heart and be always ready to give an account or a defense for that hope which is in you, the hope which the rest of the world doesn't offer, you see. So what is this? Well, what basically this chapter is saying is Christianity, or faith, if you will. We've already established that it's a verb in the sense of becoming, but it is also a verb in the state of simply being. I often use a metaphor, and I say if you look at a distance, a couple of 100 yards, and you see a tree, and on that tree is all little orange circles all over the place, what is it? And you say, it's an orange tree. And I say, how do you know that? Well, firstly, because you live in Florida. Second of all, you've seen probably an orange tree once or twice in your life, and are able to say it's obvious that that is an orange tree. If it had big, giant yellow spears all over it, what would you call it? A grapefruit tree. If it was a little plant and had a stem and a big old pineapple on it, what would you call that? Pineapple tree. I mean, it's that obvious, it's that evident. But why isn't Christianity that evident? That's what Peter's trying to say. How come the Christian is so covert? In fact, many Christians go out of their way to hide the fact that they're Christians. They go out of the way to disguise it, particularly if they're in a non-Christian area or people are, using rough and rank and ragged language. Then they kind of just act along and they play along, even though what they hear may be offensive to them. I mean, the least you could do is do what? Walk away, right? The least you could do is say, well, I don't like this movie, I'm leaving. I don't like this conversation, I'm going to go find somebody else to talk to. I don't like this, what's going on here. That's the least you can do. The best you could do is to bring up the fact, not in a judgmental way, but you hear somebody putting down somebody else, talking real bad about them. You might ask them, is this conversation really helpful to that person? Or are you just spreading more ill will about this person? Well, immediately then you're the bad guy, right? The fact of the matter is, they're the bad guy. And they're spreading their evil and they're spreading their hatred. And when the Christian steps up and says, is this conversation really helpful to this person you're talking about? Maybe you ought to be having it with them. All you're doing is suggesting a different direction. And yet, see, you're labeled the bad guy immediately because you're not participating in their evil. Now, anybody who comes up and says, oh yeah, that Vicky, she is a raggedy, nasty woman. I wouldn't mess with her. And if you jump right into it, then you're suddenly welcomed, right? You're suddenly a hero. Let's all, dump on Vicky Day. But if you step up and say, Vicky's a nice lady, I know her. Is this conversation really helpful? Maybe you should be speaking with Vicky if you have a problem with her, not spreading it to everybody else. Well, see, now suddenly I'm the bad guy, right? So, to prevent us from being bad guy, what do? We go undercover. We nobly justify it by saying, well, I didn't speak bad about Vicky, but I did stay there and say nothing. That's like me watching Lee drowned in the river and saying, well, I didn't jump in to save her, but, I didn't throw her an anchor either. She's still drowned. Sometimes doing nothing is the worst thing you can do. Sometimes it's the best thing you can do. Sometimes it's the worst thing you can do. Every time somebody gets into trouble, they get cancer, they have an accident, something terrible goes on, one of their kids kill themselves or something, all the friends disappear. And you know what the number one reason is? At least what I hear? Well, I don't know what to say to them. Sometimes you don't have to say nothing. Just go over and sit with them. And hold them. And let them cry. And be a part of that. But don't disappear. Don't run away. Don't avoid or neglect them. Well, Tom, you're a minister. You know how to do that. So, I'm a human being, just like anybody else. Don't run away. If you look at a tree in the distance, and that's all you see, what can you tell me about that tree? It's a tree. Okay, anything else? Well, it's bigger than a bush. It has a traditional trunk. It's coming out of the ground. But what kind of tree is it? You're too far away to see the leaves. What kind of tree is it? A live tree.
It's alive. It has leaves.
It's a nondescript tree. It's an undocumented tree. Just the stupidity that we kick around here in this nation. I'm not a drug dealer. I'm an undocumented pharmacist. You don't know. So when you look at a distance, you're standing on a highway or one of those overlooked places, and you look out over the hills, and there's a zillion trees, and you say to yourself, well, what kind of trees are those? And you don't know. So you guess, oh, they're probably oak and pine. Well, you don't know that, do you?
Well, oak and pine are pretty distinctively different.
No. I look at trees from airplanes when I'm flying, and I can't tell you what they are. They're just
Trees.
too many Christians are like this.
Documented?
No. They're just there, but they're really unknown. They're just a tree. Now see, if it started talking to me and I couldn't understand it, then I would say that's a cucaracha tree. I can't understand it. But too many Christians stay like this most of their lives, most of their Christian lives, when anything comes. I mean, they're there, they're present, but they're really nondescript. And even worse, they're this way at home as well, with their wives and with their husbands and with their own children. In fact, some of the most unloving places in the world are where? In our homes. We're smart enough not to belittle or holler or curse at the neighbor because they'll beat us up. But when it comes to our wives or our husbands or our kids, oh, we're right there. Anything goes. Well, why? Because they're our wives, our husbands, and our kids. My family. Peter is asking the question, how can that be? Well, it can be because of this right here. I thought you were a Christian man. I thought you were a churchgoer. I thought you were a believer of the Lord. How is it you can't even treat your own family with respect? Well, you don't treat them with respect, and when it comes to the rest of the world, you stay nondescript, unidentifiable. And Peter is saying, is that really faith? See, Peter knows a little bit about hiding out and denying Christ and running away. He was real good at it. He knew he was real good at fighting and arguing and yelling at his own men because he was real good at it. He had those arguments with the 12 apostles. Who's the greatest? Who's the best? I'm this, I'm that. I truly believe that if Jesus had exposed Judas at the Last Supper as the betrayer, I think Peter would have killed him right there. I mean, later Peter whips out his knife and cuts off a slave's ear, right? When they go to arrest him. You don't think he would have put old Judas, taken Judas out? I think he would have. You know, in a noble gesture to protect Christ. But nevertheless, I think Jesus protected Judas so that he could make his own decision as to what he wanted to believe and wanted to be, without Peter's interference. The problem is, this is what we've become in the Christian world. Now you look at me and say, well, Tom's a Christian. Why? Well, because I'm a minister, for crying out loud. That's not a far reach. But if you didn't know I was a minister and never knew anything about me being in the ministry, would I look any different than this tree here? Well, with this big yapper, chances are pretty good. You would know it. Peter's saying too many Christians are like this. Nondescript in the world, and even worse, they're counter-Christian at home. And it's got to stop. Wives, be submissive to your husband. Why? Well, because that day and age, that's what women did. Now, you might not get away with preaching that today in America, but you got to admit, ladies, you guys enjoy a privilege that most women in the world aren't allowed. Many other countries in the world, women are still just nothing. Many countries. Now, I know a few Western European countries think women are great and they can do whatever they want. They've kind of followed suit with the United States. But you ladies here in the United States of America are unlike And most of the women in the world, most of the women, they still have no rights. They still can't do this, can't do that, can't drive, can't walk, can't be without an escort, they can't do any of these things lest they're punished or worse, put to death. They can be divorced simply at the whim of a man. They can be killed at the whim of a man, and he is not held responsible. Whereas in America, you can dress up in stupid costumes, march down the street, and scream about rights that you already have. I'm not like making fun of the Women's March, but let's face it, what is it you want? Have you been to any other countries in the world? Have you seen how these people treat their women? It was even worse in the first century, under the crushing hand of Rome. If Rome did one thing, it built a lot of roads and that stuff, and it established government, but it also established social mores in the home, and that was, man was God and women were nothing. Children even less than nothing, unless they were boys and healthy. If they were healthy boys, then they could grow to be Roman soldiers. But other than that, little girls, waste of space. And oftentimes, the roads were littered with infants that were discarded and thrown out. Dad didn't want them, another girl, what a pain. So Peter is really stepping out on a limb here to write this. He's saying, women, obey your husbands. And, you know, most guys would read that and go, yeah, that ain't right. But then he says, men, be submissive to your wives. Be generous. Be considerate of them. Be gentle and kind. Treat them as an equal. Treat them as with respect. Let the love, not the hatred. Let the Christianity start and be most evident at home. And then maybe we can do something about putting some oranges on this tree. I don't have an orange pen. Maybe we can do something about putting the oranges on that tree when you're out. But first and foremost, let's let it start at the house. That's the purpose of this message here. It's got to begin somewhere. How is it you can go out and say, I'm the temple of God, but you're actually Satan's advocate at home? Because if this is happening at home, you are not the temple of God. You are not the temple of God. Or if this is happening, the nondescript tree is happening, you are not the temple of God. In order to be the temple of God, the love has got to start at the home relationships, and then breed itself out to the rest of the world. Such that people can see you and acknowledge the hope within you. In fact, not only acknowledge the hope and the kindness and the joy within you, but ask about it. How come you're always in such a great mood, even though you've been persecuted? That's your door to say, well, let me tell you about my Lord. And he says, always stand ready to give an account, a defense of the hope that is within you. Be the one to say, you know, I don't think it's right that you guys are talking bad about Vicki. Maybe you need to go have this conversation with her and let her explain to you why she is like she is, or did what she did, or whatever. It's not your place to condemn this woman without audience. It is not your place to spread evil about this woman. Well, is that going to make you the most popular person in class? Probably not. But it might put a few oranges on your tree. It might put a few oranges on your tree saying, you know, I don't want... The least you could do is walk away and not listen. The best you could do is to say, you know what? Vicki's a kind woman. Why are you talking bad about her? She's done a lot of good and a lot of help in this community, in this church, in this whatever. And you know where a lot of this infighting goes on? Not just at home, but in the church. Oh, 40 years of ministry, I've seen it. My former denomination, You ever seen The Music Man? The musical, The Music Man? 76 trombones. You ever see that? Shake your head, yes or no. Okay, you've seen it. There's a part in there where the 4 busybody women or 7 busybody women get together in town, you remember? And they were talking about Professor, whatever his name was. Howard, whatever it is, I can't remember his name. And they do that, pick, 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 talk a little, tick a little, tick a little, pick a little, pick, 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 tick, 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 tick. And what they're doing is they're talking bad about everybody in town. And, you know, they liken it unto a bunch of chickens going, chick, 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 chick. You ever see that song? That's what people do. And you know what? They do it better in the church than anywhere else on the planet. You know, you expect kids to be mean to one another out on the playground. Yeah, well, I'm the best basketball player. No, you are. You suck. Oh, you suck. You suck. You expect that nonsense because, first of all, they're children. And they're on a playground where competition is king. You know, they're very basic, instinctual, ignorant kind of animals. So they, you know, it's fight, defend, you know, eat or be eaten, so to speak. But now as you grow to an adult and you enter the church and you profess the Lord Jesus Christ, which denotes a certain degree of intelligence, and you still do it, now what's the problem? See what I'm saying? Paul says, when I was a child, I acted as a child. This is the great love chapter 13 of Paul. When I was a child, I acted as a child. I thought as a child. I spoke as a child. I got mean and grumpy and angry and threw tantrums as a child. Why? Because I was a child. But now that I'm an adult, I must put away childish thinkings. The tantrums, the name calling, the labeling, the grab your ball and go homing, that kind of stuff. When I was a child, it wasn't okay then, but I was a child. But I can assure you as an adult, as a member of God's church, the Holy Family, the royal priesthood, I can guarantee you it's not okay now. It's not okay in the church, and it sure as heck is not okay at home. Oh, Tom, it's not that bad. Yet we have millions of battered women in this country. I'm not talking about a third world hellhole. I'm talking about the United States of America. Millions of battered women beaten at home on a regular basis. How is that possible? Why aren't they allowed to have their rights? Because something has gone terribly wrong there. It's sinful. It's evil. It is of the devil. Do not succumb to this evil, said Paul, or said Peter. Don't succumb to this. It is not okay. You are not a child anymore. This love, this state of being, if you are in fact striving to be a Christian under God, has got to be all the time, 24/7, as we say. At home, on Saturdays, in the day off. You gotta mow the yard. You gotta paint the house. You gotta fix the leaky faucet. You gotta take care and maintain the Christian household. It's not okay to let something go until it rots. It's not okay to beat up your wife at home and then go to church and say, oh, I'm wonderful. You're not wonderful. Christianity is an entire commitment, submission of self to a lifestyle from day one to day last. When is it okay to stop being a Christian? Where's my Christian thing? When is it okay to stop being a Christian? When you breathe your last breath, then you can stop. Even the Lord says, well done, good and faithful servant. Now you may enter the rest of your Father. But up until this last breath, pal, you need to be on the ball. You need to stand at the ready to give account of the hope that's in you. And everybody and their mother looking at that hope better dang well be able to recognize it. That's Christianity. That's mature Christianity. You're not a child on the playground anymore. You are an adult and ambassador representing the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It better start at home. It better be out in the community, and it better be easily identified. If it's not, the problem is with you. You know, one of my fusses when I'm driving around, well, I fuss at everybody when I drive. But I think it to myself. I don't say it, but I think it to myself a million times, if I think it even once. And that is when I'm in the, in the left lane behind Grandma Butterbeans, and she's driving at 18 miles an hour on a 55 mile an hour road in the left lane. I want to sit with the lady. I do, and I want to tell her, Grandma Butterbeans, if people are passing you on the right side of your car, you're the problem. Look at all these young whippersnappers whipping around me. They're not the problem. You are. And see, that's the one thing that we Christians, trained and intelligent, enlightened individuals, are often unable to discern. 90% of the time, we are the problem. If your wife's not feeling loved, well, Tim, whose problem is that? It's her problem? No. She's the victim of that problem. She's affected by that problem, but she is not the problem. He's the problem. If Tim is not feeling loved or cared for or valued, who's the problem? And don't point to those boys. It's the cucaracha problem. You see, and that's the honest to goodness truth. If people are passing you on the right side of your automobile, you're the problem. Get out of the left lane. Or better still, get out of the car. Just pull over and let somebody else drive.
Maybe she's going to turn left down the road.
Yeah, but if I'm going to turn left in Fort Lauderdale, I don't get in the left lane in Orlando. And most of them do. Well, I'm going to turn left 27 miles from here. That is where I am least evident as a Christian, when I'm in traffic. That's my sin. I am the problem. Not all of heaven. But when I'm in traffic, Gary's a strong, faithful man of prayer because of riding with me. He prays constantly. That's the honest goodness truth. He'll tell you that. Oh, my prayer life is strong. I ride with Chandler all the time. Okay, this is chapter 3, folks. Now, this is a question. It's an intrapersonal or introspection of the individual. I can't tell you how good or bad you are at this area. Only you can. The problem is most of us won't admit it. But if you're honest with yourself, as Peter learned to be, you got to ask yourself this. You got to ask yourself this. You got to ask yourself this. Am I the kind of Christian? People often say, well, if you're strong enough in your Christian faith, then God will know you and recognize you and call you home on that last day. And people say, well, I sure hope I get in. There should be no hoping about it. You should know whether or not you're going to heaven based on who you are now on earth. The knock on the door was the most haunting parable in the Gospels. Open unto us, Lord. And he said in response, depart from me, I don't know who you are. The reason he didn't know is because they were still just nondescript, nothing entities. Never stood out, never took a stand, never made themselves known as one of his children. They never accomplished this state of being. Oh, they might have gone through some good actions, a couple of good deeds, and, helped an old lady cross the street, but they never really became someone Jesus knew. That's the worst of all the parables, the most haunting anyway. But Lord, didn't we go to Sunday school? Didn't we put up with Chinner's stories? Didn't we serve 2 years on the council with Vicky? Jesus said, "Depart from me, I don't know who you are." And tell Vicky I don't know her either. All right, that's chapter 3, folks. And 4 and 5, he's going to wrap it up here and round all of this out. Last week we saw that you're either going one direction or the other in your actions, in your life sense. This chapter is also in your being sense. Simply put, if you want to be a great athlete, what do you have to do when nobody's looking? Practice, practice, practice. As the old joke, J.K. was walking down Chicago, down Michigan Avenue. He says, "Hey, you know how to get to the John Voight Theater?" And the guy's on the side playing a saxophone. He goes, "Yeah, man." He goes, "How?" He goes, "Practice, practice, practice." You got to practice, man.